or your dumb big tits either. They're fake anyways. I like them natural and saggy.
怖い夢を見た目が覚めたベッドサイド
I was right about Limbus and its 4 stars. Kinda. Now, a while ago, I made a video called Limbus and its 4 stars. And within that video, it was pretty much just me talking about how Limbus is pretty much making 4-star IDs. If you don't know what I'm talking about because you haven't seen it, don't worry, the video was honestly pretty ass. So instead of having to make you watch it, I'm gonna just summarize it for you. So, Limbus Company is going through a good bit of power creep. And it's a lot more present as going through power creep because of the, at the time, drop of Malfaust and how comedically strong she was. Pretty much Malfaust at the time was like such a standout ID because she was just obscenely strong. She could defend for other IDs, she had a lot of HP, and she could inflict a lot of rupture. And she had a very strong skill 3 that she could access with that guard that defends other IDs. So it's like, she had a lot of tools that other IDs did not have that also could not be countered by most of the encounters within the game. Therefore, she was super duper strong. And because of this massive gap in strength, I proposed that she became a 4-star ID. Because if IDs were projected to just get stronger and stronger and stronger, and just become more unhinged with time, I think that we should add another bracket of IDs with the 4 stars. But to like make them a bit more balanced, they should have restrictions on them that make them balanced, quote unquote, like limiting the number of IDs you can use in a team, or restricting like the star level of IDs that you can have on a roster. In hindsight, yeah, they were pretty shit. They weren't really thought out very well, my comparisons weren't really accurate whatsoever. And I also completely forgot like the entire Tree of Life was like a pretty big thing when it comes to how Limbus structures its progression, or at least when it comes to like stars and whatnot, that shenanigans. Because of my very shit execution, of course, people were not very happy with the video, which should have been very expected, and I honestly don't blame people for reacting how they did. However, all because most of the video was pretty shit, it doesn't mean that I was entirely wrong. Oh yes, I'd like 1 wobble meat.
Oh yes, excellent choice.
As bad as my previous video was, I wasn't really entirely wrong, to be honest. Power creep has gotten worse, and that's pretty hard to deny nowadays. We have multiple IDs that pretty much directly encroach on like what other IDs, at least older IDs, can do. And you know, some IDs are just so strong that they pretty much blow through most encounters with ease. And with the release of some certain IDs, hint hint, yeah, it's pretty obvious that power creep is getting pretty serious. And because of things like general improvements in design, increases in coin power, and just overall damage and what they can do, this has made content both easier and harder depending on what you're using. If you're using like older IDs, then of course, you're going to have a harder time because older IDs, they have lower coin power, some of them don't really have the best of purpose within the game, they're designed for like different intentions, if that makes sense. They were made for a different time, that's for sure. And generally, they're just like more prone to being, I guess, power creeped on because when you're that weak and you don't really have that much going on for you, you're going to be having a harder time as you progress through the game, whether that's in railways or fractals or something else like that. And of course, there's going to be some guy out there who's going to be like, oh, well, clearly you're just being a bad person, or you just suck at the game. And then they're going to proceed to clear, you know, every part of the game with base IDs, which, you know, more power to them, but the average player is not going to sit through an encounter that they're struggling with and decide, ah, yes, I'm going to use base IDs. I can do this with base IDs. More often than not, people aren't going to do that. So they're either going to quit or they're going to use the next best thing, which is going to be using actually good IDs, or newer IDs in this case. Newer IDs, they tend to have higher coin powers, they tend to have more things going on, like more attacks, more cohesive effects, better effects, more debuffs, you know, stuff like that. Things that allow them to tackle, you know, layer content with more general ease. Which isn't a bad thing entirely. Like, you know, as the game progresses and our encounters get a bit more difficult, of course, we are gonna get stronger, but I don't think giving us strength through just like, you know, power creeping IDs is the way to go about it, because the game is supposed to have like this balanced roster of characters that can all be used when they're needed. Like if an encounter has an attack that targets a certain character and does a lot of damage, well then of course it'll be useful to have a tank ID or an ID that has a lot of protection. But that's usually not the case. It usually just ends up being, if you have higher numbers and you do more damage, you're just gonna encroach on everything else that came before you or everything else that doesn't, just do more damage. And it's truly not like Project Moon doesn't try to like fix this stuff. They do try to fix it with a few patches here and there, but more often than not, they usually try to amend these things with like future IDs, like leader IDs, and egos that build off a certain effect that, select IDs might use. But I'm of the opinion that the way they're going about it doesn't really make things any better. And it's because they're not really tackling three things that I think are pretty serious issues. And those three things are the way the game handles power scaling, how simple the game is inherently, and the game's relationship with difficulty. If Limbus Company is supposed to be a more difficult game, it's harder to maintain that sort of idea when IDs are allowed to be a lot more powerful than it should be at any point in the game. Now, the reason I think this happens outside of power creep is because of how the game handles uptying. Uptying is a very big factor behind an ID's power. The difference between an uptie 2 ID and an uptie 3 ID is massive, and the difference between an uptie 3 ID and uptie 4 is also pretty big depending on where you're looking at. If uptying was to be reworked or reevaluated across the board, then I think that would be a bit healthier for the game. Maybe adding sections in the game where you can't uptie certain IDs, or maybe adding sections where you're restricted because it's a challenge mode or whatever. But of course you can't talk about scaling without mentioning power creep and ID design. Power creep, yes, it's an issue. I think a lot of IDs should be buffed, nerfed, readjusted, and reworked across the board just to better give them more identity and to also undo a lot of the homogenization that's been going on within the game. Because in my personal opinion, a lot of IDs have been leaning towards damage when they really shouldn't have. And because of this lean towards damage, a lot of IDs tend to feel the same, and a lot of IDs tend to feel like just upgrades of one another rather than situational puzzle pieces that could be used to help you get past a certain part of the game or a certain encounter that you faced up against in a real way or something like that. And when it comes to design, this homogenization also makes it so that IDs that are like bruisery or more defensive or more supportive aren't really given that much spotlight or that much usage because there's an excess of IDs that are just focused on doing a lot of damage. Now, with that being said, you would initially have the idea that IDs that are supportive or more tanky in nature have a lot of value, but that really isn't the case because of the next point that I'm about to bring up. Now, when it comes to the game's simplicity, I also think that it's a problem. Sure, a simple game is very good for capturing a very casual audience, which is something that Project Moon really needs in this case because their previous games don't really lend themselves to being casual friendly. Casuals aren't really known for liking a lot of difficult games, so asking them to spend money on Ruina or LobCorp, that's like convincing your grandma that she could take on Prime Tyson in the ring, mind you. No shade to your grandma, but I don't think she's gonna last against Prime Tyson. Which is why I think that Limbus Company is a much more casual friendly game, or an easier game in general. That simplicity and that general ease is what convinces players to spend money on the game. Because, Kim Ji-hoon needs like his second anime or whatever. But I also think that simplicity is also pretty harmful for the game. Since the game is very simple, most encounters end up being a DPS check, or just how much damage can you do in who knows how many turns, which, nothing wrong about damage checks, they can be pretty fun to navigate, but when it's the same thing over and over and over again, it becomes repetitive and it becomes boring. When you take into account the potential that Limbus Company has at base already, it's a shame that they don't really explore those options outside of a few instances in railways. And when the game is also trying to be this difficult and engaging game, your only option to really create that difficulty and engagement is by resorting to cheap and stupid tricks like that one bitch in Kanto 9.5. I hate you. I don't like your dumb haircut, your dumb goons, or your dumb big tits either. They're fake anyways. I like them natural and saggy. But when it comes to trying to create that engagement, it can result in Project Moon choosing to do things that aren't very fun to begin with, like damage gates, and sure kill attacks and stuff like that. So if the game was to become a bit more in-depth, had more mechanics, had more creative encounters, then more things like tanky IDs, healer IDs, supportive IDs, utility IDs, and stuff like that, they would find more value throughout the game, because more encounters will require you to invest within those IDs and try out new things, revolving, and try out new things in general. That's probably gonna cut weird. But I'm also very well aware that doing all that will be very difficult, or at least it would be very difficult to go back and change everything to fit that standard. So of course, before Project Moon can do any of that, they need an incentive. And it's difficult to make a good enough incentive for that when the result of doing something like this could hurt Project Moon. Now I say the game's relationship with difficulty is an issue because it ties in with everything prior I just talked about. The game's difficulty is probably the game's biggest roadblock before it can do anything else. Because of the game's need to maintain a casual player base, it needs to be easy and accessible, because if it's not really that easy and accessible, then of course it's going to be harder for players to really want to push through and play the game and experience the game's amazing story. So because of that, many of the game's encounters that were very difficult, like Lei Hang when I was really getting into the game, that guy got nerfed like once, maybe twice to my memory, and people did not like that because they felt that he was a pretty good encounter, people just did not read. But I'm more inclined to believe that it's more like people didn't really care for that. They didn't really have the conditioning for that. Because how the game handles difficulty is the thing that's also holding it back from being more difficult, from being more in-depth, from doing a lot of these things that it really should have been doing from the very start. Now the reason I say that the game's relationship with difficulty is a major roadblock isn't because of how easy the game is, but it's more like how the difficulty goes up and down throughout the game. The game is mostly pretty easy throughout most of the game, with really serious spikes in very select parts of the game. And it's because of that difficulty curve that creates a lot of player frustration, and when players get frustrated, the developers might feel a bit of pressure to nerf certain things, or to change things, or to design certain things in a way that will reduce frustration and make things easier. But of course, by doing that, they're just making their game a bit more boring, a bit more simple, and making issues with scaling and power creep. So I believe that if the game was to fix scaling and to make it a bit more of a gradual experience, and to make it something that actually conditions players to expect dying, healing, maybe even reviving, and engaging with the game's mechanics and features that it has to offer, then it would make for a healthier experience overall. It would allow for the game to be a bit more in-depth, it would allow for mechanics to be a bit more intriguing and interesting, and a bit more fun to play with, rather than having those things be restricted to just railways and maybe occasionally being seen in, Mirror Dungeon? It's just a second monitor mode for me at this point. The game's difficulty is certainly the game's biggest hurdle. Will it be easy to figure out? The fuck no. But I feel as though that there are ways to handle this curve to make it a gradual, fair, and engaging way to really interact with the game. Well, that wraps up everything I've got to say for this video. I'm really trying to come at this with good intentions. Hell, I've already tried to re-record this. Oh my gosh, who knows how many times. So, truly, please, if you have something to say, be constructive about it. I gave this one my best shot despite my own conditions. And as easy as it would be to just put this into TTS, or better yet, just not make this video, I don't think I could live with myself if I never did this. So please, give me feedback, give me what you think, but please also be considerate and don't be a dick about it, because I will cry about it, that is for certain. But aside from that, if you just generally liked what you saw, please be sure to like and comment and subscribe, and please be sure to come back for more. And with that being said, I'll be sure to see y'all in the next one. Bye. Oh wait, I mean, bye-bye. Yeah, that's more like it.
の